And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's October the 7th, 280th day of the year. Just 85 days remain to the year's over with. Well, this is the second year anniversary of the October 7th attacks, which, of course, if you remember, it was a series of coordinated and armed incursions from the Gaza Strip into the Gaza envelope of southern Israel, carried out by Hamas. And there's been a series of talks trying to get the hostages released. In fact, there's ceasefire talks away right now as Israel marks the anniversary. Well, turning to other holidays and observances, it's National Taco Day, National Inner Beauty Day, National Frappe Day. It's a delicious frozen treat. You share it with others. National Bathtub Day, Team Margot Stem Cell and Bone Marrow Awareness Day, National Propane Day, National Forgiveness and Happiness Day, National LED Light Day, National Fruit at Work Day, and a National Day of Peaceful Communication, You Matter to Me Day, World Cotton Day, World Day for Decent Work, Trigeminal Neuralgia Awareness Day. Had to think about that one for a minute. You can experience sudden intense facial pain challenges daily. It raises awareness about this particular ailment to foster understanding and support. Mid-Autumn Festival, National Manufacturing Week, World Animal Week, BPD Awareness Week, International Plasma Awareness Week, Seed Gathering Season, Red Valley Back Care Awareness Week, National Curry Week, Truffle Days in Croatia, the Irish Film Festival. It's a lively celebration of LGBTQ cinema, brings filmmakers, audience together in Cardiff. This platform is a significant platform for queer stories and diverse voices. Celebrate Community Week, World Space Week, National Midwifery Week, National Spinning and Weaving Week, National Dance Week, Hospice Care Week. Famous people born on this date, the one and only Simon Cowell. Well, on that note, let us turn to the stories in the news, because there's always something going on. President Trump tells Democrats to open the government tonight amid prolonged shutdown. The Monday evening, he slammed the lawmakers for shutting down the government amid one of the most stressful, successful economies, calling on them to reopen the government tonight. Democrats have shut down the government right in the midst of one of the most successful economies, including a record stock market that our country's ever had, according to President Trump. He says, I'm happy to work with the Democrats on their failed health care policies or anything else, but first they've got to allow the government to reopen. In fact, they should open the government tonight. He made that post after Senate Democrats blocked Republican efforts to reopen the government, ensuring the shutdown will last at least a week. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, who by all accounts is responsible for this shutdown, and most Democrats say they won't support funding the government unless Congress agrees to extended expiring Obamacare subsidies. What they want to do is give free health care to all undocumented immigrants. The Senate Majority Leader, John Thune, Republican of South Dakota, says at least 8 Democrats have to back the GOP bill, which would reopen the government through November 21st. So far, only Senators John Fetterman, Democratic of Pennsylvania, Catherine Cortez Masto, Democrat of Nevada, Angus King, Independent from Maine, have broken ranks to end the shutdown. The Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, is the only Republican who is holding out, trying to get the government reopened. Well, voting is underway in 2025 election that may determine if Republicans continue to hold the House in 2026 midterms. Early voting is underway in California in a special election that will make a huge impact on next year's battle for the U.S. House majority. California voters are deciding whether to pass a ballot proposition this November, which would dramatically alter the state's congressional districts, putting the left-leaning state front and center in the high-stakes political fight over redistricting that puts President Trump and the GOP against the Democrats. California state lawmakers this summer approved a special proposition on the November ballot to obtain voter approval to temporarily sidetrack the state's nonpartisan redistricting commission and return the power to draw the congressional maps to the Democratic-dominated legislature. This effort in California would create 5 more Democratic-leaning congressional districts, aims to counter the passage in the reliable red state of Texas of a new map that aims to create up to 5 8-leaning House seats. Failure to approve what's known as Proposition 50 would have a stinging setback for Democrats. Gavin Newsom thinks he's in the catbird seat. We'll see. Now, Jimmy Kimmel is almost at his pre-suspension viewership. He has shedded 85% of key viewers since his hype comeback show. His ratings boom appears to be circling the drain. If you'll remember, Disney briefly suspended Jimmy Kimmel Live last month after the host remarks about the alleged assassin of Charlie Kirk. It sparked widespread backlash. And once Disney reversed course, the liberal comedian drew a massive audience for his much-hyped return, September 23rd. On Thursday, October 2nd, Jimmy Kimmel Live averaged 1.9 million viewers, shedding 71% of the audience that tuned in for the host return from suspension. Decline among the advertiser-coveted demographics of adults aged 25 to 54 was even more significant. Jimmy Kimmel Live managed 265,000 viewers from that critical group on Thursday night to lose 85% of the 1.7 million that turned in on September 23rd. Marked his smallest audience among demo viewers since the suspension. It also trailed Fox News' Gutfeld across the board on Thursday. Well, White House advisor Stephen Miller laughed off CNN's dumb question about alleged racial profiling in ICE raids. They don't seem to understand the purpose of the raids is to find those who are here illegally. So, of course, you're looking for those who meet the demographics of the illegal society south of us. He laughed off what he called a dumb question about alleged racial profiling in immigrant raids during an interview on Monday. Spoke with host Boris Sanchez about President Trump's plan to send National Guard troops to Illinois to protect U.S. immigration and custom enforcement facilities. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker criticized the decision, calling it an invasion by the Trump administration and accusing ICE agents of harassing people based only on their race. Duh. If you're going to deport those of Hispanic birth or here illegally, you look at Hispanics. According to Sanchez, the question that got everybody upset, is it the case that, as Pritzker framed it, you're profiling brown people, that this immigrant crackdown is designed to go after people of color? And Miller laughed and said, "What a dumb question." The illegal aliens are here taking jobs away from blacks. They're taking jobs away from whites, taking jobs away from Latinos. They're taking their health benefits away. They're taking their school slots away. And of course, in many cases, they're committing heinous crimes. We can't have a system of laws in this country that privileges illegal aliens over American citizens. And that's what they're doing. You know it, and I know it. So that's not exactly a no, Stephen, Sanchez responded. You just can't unequivocally state that immigration policies. I said it's a dumb question. Okay, no, it was a dumb question. Well, Patricia Heaton warns Americans could face another 911 if the nation ignores rising anti-Semitism and radical Islam. She's an award-winning actress and pro-Israel advocate. Warned Americans if they don't speak out against rising anti-Semitism and anti-West propaganda after the October 7, 2023 Hamas terror attacks on Israel, we're going to face another 9/11. Heaton, along with #EndJewHatred and the Lawfare Project founder, Brooke Goldstein, spoke to Fox News ahead of the 2-year anniversary of the October 7th massacre, warned that Americans aren't paying enough attention to the threat posed by anti-Semitism and radical Islam, not only to Jewish people, but to all Americans. She said, it's hard to believe, but we're going to see a 9/11 again in this country if people don't wake up, take a stand, and make their voices heard. And unfortunately, she's very probably right. Well, Denise Richards broke down in court as she recounts the shocking alleged abuse she put up with. This was Monday in the courtroom. She recalled the alleged abuse she endured at the hands of her estranged husband, Aaron Vipers. She's the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills star, granted a temporary restraining order against the Vipers on July 17th amid their ongoing divorce. So she took the stand to testify against her estranged husband. At one point during the hearing, she pleaded for a tissue and began crying while recalling a particularly abusive event in July. Richards claimed that Vipers got very volatile with her at the Four Seasons Hotel just hours after the reality TV star had undergone multiple cosmetic surgeries, including a facelift. Well, Jack Hawley has ripped Jack Smith's Biden Stasi probe, calls alleged spying abuses of power beyond Watergate. It was Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri. According to special counsel Jack Smith, accused him of spying on political opponents during the January 6th probe, and called the alleged surveillance of an abuse of power beyond Watergate. The FBI, under Smith's direction, got call logs and metadata tied to nearly a dozen GOP senators, including Hawley himself, as part of its investigation into the Capitol riot. The tracking involved getting call records and timestamps. They didn't really look at the content of the conversation. They just looked at the fact there were conversations. Well, Burbank, California airport has gone without air traffic controllers for hours amid the government shutdown. And of course, California Governor Gavin Newsom blamed Trump for the situation at the Hollywood Burbank airport. A staffing shortage meant there were no controllers on duty between 4:15 p.m. and 10 p.m. local time. Their arrival and departure duties were reportedly handed off to the Southern California Terminal Radar Approach Control Facility based in San Diego. It's according to Fox 11 Los Angeles. The staffing issue prompted several flight cancellations. At 5 p.m., the average flight delay at Burbank Airport was 2 hours and 30 minutes. And of course, according to Gavin Newsom, everything evil in the world is the fault of President Trump. If he'd been put in charge, Newsom, we wouldn't have any of these issues. Well, Prince William is said to be haunted by childhood pain as he faces new family worries. He is determined to shield his eldest child from these painful challenges growing up. He made a rare appearance on Eugene Levy's Apple TV Plus travel series, The Reluctant Traveler. He discussed Prince George's future. William is 43, said his parents' turbulent marriage played out on the world stage, shaped how he raised his three children, especially George, who's second in line to the throne. British broadcaster and photographer Elena Shard told Fox News that William remains deeply committed to giving his children a stable, happy upbringing that he never had, especially as they grow older. According to Shard, William and Harry experienced a broken family unit with their parents embroiled in constant destructive battles. Well, that's many families. Well, a former October 7th captive is free. And he said, President Trump saved me, and I believe he can free the remaining hostages. This was, individual's name was Ohad Ben Ami. He said 2 years ago, on October 7th, 2023, he was kidnapped from his home in Kibbutz Be'eri in his pajamas by Hamas terrorists. His wife, Roz, and he were ripped from their lives and dragged into Gaza. He said he was released in February 2025 after 491 days in captivity. But there are 48 hostages said to be still in Hamas' hands. He said his nightmare is not over. It won't be until they all come home. And he said, finally, there's hope. President Trump has brought forth a historic deal to bring all 48 hostages home, the living and the dead. And in this war, in this suffering to the people, after so much pain, we finally have a real chance. But of course, there's fear. There have been opportunities collapsed before. Deal hadn't been signed yet. And Hamas seems to believe they have a right to kill anybody they want to kill. Well, October Amazon Prime days are coming. There's a lot of things that are going to be on special pricing. Well, a Chicago gang leader offered a bounty, $10,000 to anybody who would kill the Border Patrol commander, according to federal officials. This is federal agents in Chicago Monday arrested a suspected Latin Kings leader accused of offering cash bounties to capture and kill the senior immigration officer working with Operation Midway Blitz. U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois unsealed a criminal complaint Monday, charging 37-year-old Chicago resident Juan Espinoza Martinez with a single count of murder for hire. Department of Homeland Security identified the official Martinez allegedly placed a bounty on as a commander-at-large for the U.S. Border Patrol, Chief Gregory Bovino. Martinez was taken into custody Monday morning. His initial court appearance hadn't yet been scheduled. U.S. Attorney Andrew Boutros called the alleged plot an attack on the rule of law. We'll see if one of God's anointed lets him out, pats him on the head and says, go forth and sin no more. Well, Jesse Waters, in his monologue, said Trump won't allow the federal government to come under attack. Well, police union has called on Jay Jones to quit after a claim more dead cops will mean fewer shootings. That's going to be one of the stupidest statements I've heard. He's Virginia's embattled Democratic Attorney General candidate. Once allegedly suggested that more police officers are killed, they'd shoot fewer people. That's according to a former colleague in the state legislature. Republican Delegate Carrie Corner told Virginia Scope on Monday during a 2020 conversation about qualified immunity. She told Jones that without legal protection, police officers would get killed. And he responded, well, if a few more of them died, they'd move on and not shoot people, not kill people. That's according to Jones. Well, Jones is already under fire after Corner previously revealed the 2022 text exchanges in which he suggested he'd shoot then House Speaker Todd Gilbert over Adolf Hitler. Also said Gilbert and his wife should have to watch his fascist children die. And this is a man who's an elected official. Well, President Trump looms large over a special election primary in the deep red congressional district. His immense political clout and Republican nomination faces a test yesterday in a crowded, competitive GOP special election primary for a vacant congressional seat in Tennessee. Primary election comes after Trump late last week endorsed one of the 11 Republican candidates vying to fill the seat in Tennessee's 7th congressional district, vacated by a GOP representative, Mark Green, who resigned from office in June to take a private sector job. Trump endorsed Matt Van Epps, a former commissioner of the Tennessee Department of General Services, in a field that also included State Representative Jody Barrett, Gino Bolso, and Lee Reeves. Okay, let's see what else we got. Well, the Trump administration has announced a 25% tariff on medium and heavy-duty trucks. The trucking industry moves roughly 73% of all domestic freight. He said on Monday his administration is going to impose this tariff on the medium and heavy-duty trucks. The White House didn't immediately respond to Fox Business's request for a comment. U.S. trucking industry is a cornerstone of the national economy, according to the American Trucking Association. About 2 million Americans work as heavy and tractor-trailer truck drivers, with many more employed as mechanics and support staff. And much more, profit margins across the U.S. logistics sector are typically slim, leaving it highly sensitive to any unexpected increases in operating costs. Well, we've had 2 major wrecks because the drivers of heavy-duty trucks couldn't read or speak English. Well, Netanyahu finds an unlikely ally amid concerns about governmental collapse and uncertain hostage deals. As I said at the beginning of the show, it's been 2 years since the horrific events of October 7, 2023, when Hamas terrorists attacked Israel and killed 1,200 men, women, and children before they took 251 others into the Gaza Strip. There's still no hostage deal, and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government's facing possible collapse. But he's found an unlikely ally in former Prime Minister and leader of the opposition, Yair Lapid, who extended a security net to the conservative leader this week in a move to secure the government as negotiations with Hamas remain ongoing. Well, Texas Christian University students vowed to restore Christian values on campus with the Turning Point USA. President of the Turning Point USA chapter at Texas Christian University told Fox News she wants to lead the organization to bring Christian values back to a campus where it's rare to come by. Said the chapter's been around for about 7 years. She became president last year. Her name is Annie Seller. She's a senior working toward a BS in mathematics and a BFA in dance, and very motivated to push for her belief and values on campus. Well, state of Maine's investigating a claim that 250 unmarked ballots were found in an Amazon box. A resident claimed her Amazon order arrived containing hundreds of unmarked absentee ballots last week. The ballots sent out ahead of November's election reportedly missing by the town of Ellsworth, Maine. Same day this woman said she found the ballots on her doorstep. Maine Secretary of State Sheena Bellows said the state law enforcement and the FBI are investigating the incident. Going to have more shenanigans. And according to Senator Kennedy, Washington elites have lost their perspective in their anger over President Trump. Trump derangement syndrome is unbelievable. Well, yesterday we were talking about strange UFO abduction cases. And we still got some more to talk about. We got one interesting case. I call it the case of the hungry hunter. It's one of the strangest, still unexplained sightings took place in the Colorado National Park of Medicine Bow. 25th of October, 1974. A man named Carl Higdon was out hunting elk when had some kind of intervention of the extraterrestrial kind. He'd purchased some high-quality hunting gear and was ready to test it out on the wild game that Medicine Bow provides. By himself in the northernmost reaches of the park, when he spotted his prize, a group of fully grown elk grazing in the forest. Well, it was just a moment before he had those elk in his line of vision and took aim and he pulled the trigger. And being an expert marksman, he thought at least one of those animals should have dropped to the ground dead. But the instant he pulled the trigger, something very unusual happened. The bullet came out of the end of the gun, moving in slow motion. Instead of a near instantaneous blast dropping one of the creatures, he could actually track the movement of this impossibly slow bullet with his eyes, and it floated through the air at a leisurely speed. Incredibly, instead of hitting the elk, the bullet drifted harmlessly to the ground, like a leaf falling from a tree. It fell down a short distance away from the creatures. Amazed at what he saw, he followed the path of his bullet, found it, picked it up off the ground to examine, and tried to figure out how such an odd occurrence could have happened. Well, shortly after he picked up the bullet, he heard some movement nearby and turned around in time to see an incredibly strange sight. Standing there right in front of him was a non-human entity. The creature was slightly taller than he was, dressed in a black uniform of some sort. It had what appeared to be military-like insignia decorating the front of it. Had a yellowish, almost jaundiced skin, but the strangest feature was the fact that this apparent alien didn't seem to have any jawline to speak of. The head was just a continuation of the neck, with eyes, nose, and mouth positioned on the face. Its entire cranium seemed almost like a stalk of corn standing up between the shoulder blades, with facial features attached to it. This creature also had a bizarre secondary characteristics of almost vegetable-like stalks of what might be considered hair poking out from the top of its squash-shaped head. But as strange as it looked, it spoke English and introduced itself to the hunters, also one. Now, this was a name, or it might have been a title, that once again reflected a military-style origin. The being, who was apparently the one who had stopped his bullet, inquired of the hunter why he was trying to kill the elk, and then he asked the hunter if he was hungry. And the hunter admitted to the alien he was hungry, and also one handed him some sort of multivitamin, telling him if he consumed the pill, he'd be fully nourished for several days. Well, strangely enough, standing in the woods talking to an alien, he took the multivitamin, even though he usually hated swallowing capsules of any kind. He's invited by the entity to come with him on board his spacecraft. He was asked, would you like to come with me? And in one of the most comically anticlimactic moments in UFO lore, as a response to this earth-shattering question, Carl just gave her a shrug in response. When asked by a bizarre extraterrestrial entity if he'd like to take a ride on a spaceship and go to a distant and unknown fate, Carl basically said, well, gee, I don't know. I guess so. Well, after this tepid acquiescence was made, the being took him right on board his spaceship and strapped him down on a chair as preparations were made for the journey. From his vantage point, Carl could see into another section of the craft where the group of elk he'd been stalking were being held captive. They were apparently under some sort of paralysis and completely immobile, standing upright in the room as if in suspended animation. And Carl could see out a window to the outside of the craft, and he was stared in disbelief as they were flying through the air, out of the atmosphere and away from the Earth entirely, until the Earth was reduced to just a pale blue dot of light outside of the spaceship's windows. Well, the alien, who referred to himself as also one, then approached his passenger and informed him they were now going to begin the journey back to the alien's homeworld. He said they were about to travel 163,000 light years. And just to put things into perspective, 1 light year is about 5 quadrillion 878,625,373,183 miles. With current human technology, traveling even 1 light year is completely out of our grasp, let alone 163,000. Well, if Carl had been an astrophysicist, he might just have crapped his pants at that point. Incredibly, once the ship fired up its engines, the journey back to Also One's homeworld took just about 10 seconds. Aliens apparently configured some controls and punched a few buttons, and the ship was sent hurtling through space and time, and boom, there they were. Carl was then escorted off the spaceship right into the heart of some sort of alien city where the vessel had landed. Well, here Carl saw several tall buildings reaching up into the sky, just like you might find in human cities, except much taller and much more streamlined than in any earthly urban landscape. Well, as they traversed the alien city streets, he noticed what appeared to be a group of human beings standing on a street corner, talking among themselves. He was amazed to find members of his own species in this alien environment, but he had soon learned the aliens here seemed to be expert collectors of wildlife of all kinds, whether the elk from Medicine Bow National Forest or a few random members of the human race. Well, shortly after he made these observations, he was put inside some sort of medical observation equipment. His entire body was scanned by Also One. Shortly after this testing, though, the aliens announced that Carl was not what they needed. Bizarrely, as if he were opening up some interdimensional trapdoor, the alien pulled a lever and Carl was instantaneously transported back to Medicine Bow. And although he seemed amazingly cool, calm, and collected throughout the experience, when he got back, he had a bit of a nervous breakdown. Once he made it back to civilization, he was sent to the hospital as a consequence. After the hospital ran a few tests, they discovered that he was actually in perfect health apart from his rattled nerves, and not only that, the highly nutritious vitamin the alien had given him had managed to clear up every physiological ailment, every physical ailment he'd ever had. His kidney stones cleared up, and long damaged lung tissue from a bout of tuberculosis was healed. The only thing that wasn't healed was Carl's vasectomy. And in retrospect, Carl had the feeling this is the reason he was rejected by the aliens. His belief was the ETs were attempting to create a kind of wildlife preserve full of humans and other animals from Earth, and the fact he wouldn't be able to reproduce and breed more humans made him not what they needed for the decisive little alien conservationist. Well, from Medicine Bow, let's talk about the Christian burial of a dead spaceman. There are a lot of skeptics out there who still say they only believe in the alien UFO myth if somebody could take them to the dead body of an extraterrestrial. Well, actually, there is a certain cemetery in Aurora, Texas, that contains a grave, a tombstone, and an entire monument for the dead spaceman who supposedly crashed to the Earth in the 1890s. Occurring during what's known as the Mystery Airship Flap, this event actually made the newspapers at the time, which noted that an airman from another world had crashed in Aurora, Texas. According to one of the last surviving witnesses who died in the 1980s, the airship was a metallic craft that struck a windmill before losing control and slamming down to the ground. Local residents landed the scene and found one dead occupant in a pile of molten debris. They knew pretty much immediately that this pilot was dead and decided to give him a good Christian burial. Townspeople gathered and gave the pilot a funeral of sorts, and they dubbed him the Martian as they put him to rest. Well, according to the Dallas Morning News, on that day in 1897 at about 6 in the morning, people working in the fields or going about their routine found themselves shocked to see a UFO flying overhead. The craft was heading north and hovering very low on the ground. The unknown object appeared to be having some sort of mechanical failure and was on the verge of outright crashing when it collided with the windmill of Judge J.S. Proctor. According to the story, the craft exploded into a massive fireball, completely annihilating the windmill, and the resulting explosion was seen for several miles. As a result of this explosion, debris was scattered all over the grounds. It's not clear how many occupants may have originally been on the craft, but the locals who arrived at the scene were unable to find one intact corpse. But this one corpse was enough for them to realize that this craft and its pilot were certainly not of this world. Our knowledge of the solar system was still rudimentary at this point, but Mars seemed like the most likely point to find life, and so the townspeople labeled the downed airman a Martian. Bit hard to separate fact from fiction with his 120-year-old story, but the official newspaper today went on to state that there was some sort of writing in an alien script found with the dead pilot. Also claimed the craft was built with a completely unknown method of metallurgy. By all accounts, in 1897, it wasn't something the local blacksmith could have cooked up. Well, after this thought-provoking detail, the newspaper account ends this extraordinary story with the rather mundane-sounding statement the pilot's funeral will take place at noon tomorrow. And apparently, following this funeral service and burial, this entire story was buried and largely forgotten until 1973, when researchers rediscovered it and began to investigate the incident and brought it to the attention of a national audience. Started out with journalist Bill Case, who looked into the matter and located the previous owner of the property where the crash occurred, Mr. Brawley Oates. He soon discovered Mr. Oates had actually found some strange metallic wreckage buried on his property near where the original crash site was said to be. Now, this was in 1945 when he was attempting to seal up his water well. His digging uncovered the unusual artifacts. Not thinking much of it about the time, this former owner of the property simply chucked the hunks of metal back down into the well. Well, the next revelation to occur in this case was when United Press International managed to locate a 91-year-old resident named Mary Evans, who remembered her parents being on the scene after the UFO crashed, and they relayed to her what they saw. Her parents' testimony very much concurred with the official newspaper report, and they stated unequivocally that the pilot of the crashed ship was not of this world. Mary also recalled the deceased extraterrestrial pilot was indeed buried in the town cemetery, and this news generated massive interest, and soon there were groups demanding that the body of the supposed downed spaceman be immediately exhumed. Well, the Cemetery Association refused. Debate over the gravesite would continue. Supposedly, the reason the Cemetery Association denied access after all these years is because of an archaic next of kin law that stipulated the next of kin has to be notified before remains are exhumed. But since the next of kin of this alien is, of course, unknown to anybody and nowhere to be found, this creates the perfect excuse for the perpetual denial when it comes to potentially uncovering the body of a genuine extraterrestrial. Now, there are still efforts underway to get to the bottom of this mystery, but as of right now, this alien sighting remains unexplained. Well, from Aurora, Texas, let's go to Zimbabwe. Some people say the encounters of UFOs and aliens are largely a figment of the West's imagination. But there were events that occurred in the African town of Rua in Zimbabwe, September 16, 1994. And these events show that this couldn't be further from the truth. Aurora is located about 10 miles from the Zimbabwean capital of Harare. Focal point of this encounter was a primary education facility called the Aerial School. Kind of appropriate, don't you think? Several of the children who attended the area were playing on the school grounds when unknown craft began to appear in the sky. This small armada of UFOs seemed able to appear and disappear at will, and as the astonished children ran around the schoolyard trying to keep up with the objects, it almost seemed like they were playing some sort of game with them. And the game abruptly ended when one of the craft decided to make a landing. Most of the teachers at a meeting inside the school managed to miss the sighting, but 62 children and one adult, a woman who was selling food at a concession stand on school grounds, saw the entire spectacle. These inquisitive children, dispensing with all fear, actually ran toward the strange craft that just landed in front of them. And as they approached, they saw a diminutive entity emerge from the UFO. Well, according to the kids who bore witness to it, the alien who emerged from the craft had dark gray skin, a big head on a small neck, and large all-black eyes. And it was these large, spellbinding eyes that it used to communicate with the children. And according to the kids, as soon as they made eye contact with the creature, their minds were filled with a flood of images and feelings at a rapid pace, so rapid they could barely comprehend what was happening. Well, some have compared this event to a kind of data dump in which, to borrow from today's tech-savvy speech, the alien was directly downloading information into the observers' minds. They saw images of an uncertain future and the planet being destroyed by pollution and other side effects of man's technological growth. The being imparted a direct message that they needed to do something to advance man's spiritual development in order to offset some of the industrial abuses that were taking place. But rather than comprehend this as a great message of peace from the ET ambassador who'd landed before him, most of the students at this point were scared out of their tiny little minds. They began to cry and ask for help from the only adult on hand, the lady at the concession stand. She was just as frightened as they were and proceeded to hide in the confines of her store. Another group of students ran off to alert their teachers inside the school as to what was going on. But as you might imagine, the teachers dismissed the story as utter nonsense, workings of overactive imaginations, and refused to believe them. And by the time any of the staff stepped outside to look into the claims, the craft and its alien occupant were gone. Teachers figured the kids were making up stories, but when they realized just how incredibly distraught some of them were, they didn't know quite what to make of it. Well, not knowing what else to do, they canceled classes, shut down the school, and sent everybody home. The very next day, a researcher from the Mutual UFO Network arrived on the scene and conducted separate interviews with the children. In addition to asking questions, once they were each isolated, he requested them to draw exactly what they saw the previous day. Well, to the astonishment of the investigator, all the children drew the exact same entity without any corroboration or suggestion from their peers, suggesting they had indeed seen something of this exact same creature. The event happened back in 1994, but if you ask any of the eyewitnesses about it today, nearly 25 years later, you'll find their stories haven't changed in the slightest. Well, the students who saw the event at the aerial school mostly dispersed to places far removed from Zimbabwe, such as the U.S. and Canada and England, but a few decided to remain, and when they were interviewed recently, they said that whenever there's a class reunion at aerial, this still unexplained sighting is the first thing they're all going to talk about. Well, one thing about the ubiquitous CIA, you find its traces everywhere. In fact, we've got a story about a former CIA agent who played mind games with aliens. Well, much of the stories we receive in regard to alien sightings have come from average people with mundane lives. But the story of Daryl Sims is a different kettle of fish altogether. He used to work for the very agency that many UFO conspiracy theories have portrayed as part of the cover-up when it comes to aliens. He was once a special agent for the CIA. But his information on UFOs and aliens doesn't come so much from his previous work with the CIA as from his own personal experience. Because according to Mr. Sims, he was an abductee. The first encounter with aliens occurred when he was a small child in 1952 in Midland, Texas, which was his childhood home. He had a bedroom located in the back of the house, but there were outside lights attached to a well house immediately behind his room, so he was always bathed in dim lighting, allowing him to see easily at night. It was under this dim light that he first perceived the alien entity that had previously mysteriously appeared in the middle of his room, spontaneously awakened to see a creature who was all white from head to toe. He said it was quite literally as white as snow. The creature wasn't wearing any clothing, and the classic alien features, a big head and big eyes and small nose and just a slit for a mouth, let him know immediately that this visitor was not human. According to Sims, he immediately felt that the fact that he saw the creature was some sort of error mistake on the creature's part. The entity appeared just as shocked and surprised as he was when it saw Sims' eyes open up and Sims come fully awake. If the entity wasn't prepared for this to happen and had expected him to remain asleep, well, after getting over its surprise, the being moved in to correct his glitch by looking directly into Sims' eyes and sending him a telepathic signal that instantly rendered him paralyzed. Although he couldn't move, he could still see, and he saw the entity still standing over his completely helpless body. By this point, he was frightened, and interestingly, if this episode is to be believed, it seems to present itself as a complete opposite of sleep paralysis. A lot of critics and detractors of alien abduction accounts, especially those that occur in the middle of the night, have claimed that these are simply particularly vivid dreams coupled with sudden awakening to the full throes of sleep paralysis. The condition known as sleep paralysis happens to all of us, with the exception of sleepwalkers. We all become temporarily paralyzed while we sleep. This happens as a safeguard to keep us from acting out our dreams. Critics of the alien abduction narrative often attempted to explain instances of people waking up paralyzed and Seeing odd figures at the end of their beds is nothing more than a ramification of a sudden interruption of his bodily process. But in the case of Sims, he woke up fully able to move, and the alien creature he observed did something to make him paralyzed. Didn't open up his eyes to find himself paralyzed, as is common with sleep paralysis. Woke up fully mobile and was then rendered completely immobile. Entity wasn't done either. As Sam stared in unblinking, utterly paralyzed horror, the creature actually pulled away the cover that half covered his face, making it hard for him to hide under the covers, and once again stared deeply into his eyes. As the alien looked him in the eye, something about his perception of the experience changed. In fact, the entity seemed to be directly changing Sim's perception of events. And as he stared down at him, right before his eyes, the creature seemed to shapeshift, shifting from the frightening alien to a comical and friendly clown. According to Sims, it was as if it had pulled the most cartoonish and upbeat image it could find right out of his own memory, and then superimposed that image onto itself, either to hide its identity or to lessen the fear that Daryl Sims was experiencing, or maybe it was both. At any rate, he was now staring directly at Bozo the Clown as he whimsically walked around the bedroom. This action would seem to be an example of an entity directly employing a screen memory in order to conceal what was actually happening to the abductee. Sims claims he had experienced odd instances such as this all throughout his life. He also maintained as a CIA agent he dealt with and investigated many claims from others who claimed to experience this kind of sleight of mind trick. Incredibly, he believes this is why so many people are afraid of creepy clowns, because they're experiencing an event such as he did, where some overachieving alien attempted to pull the wool over their eyes by employing a screen memory. Even more telling is the case of Sims. The next morning he was at the breakfast table with a fragment of his strange dream about the clown already becoming foggy when he noticed a small mark on his body of a type the alien abduction researchers commonly refer to as a scoop mark. One of the greatest pieces of anecdotal evidence for the phenomena. Alleged alien abductees from all around the world seem to have these places on their skin where a chunk of flesh has been scooped out. Literally looks as if somebody took a small spoon and scooped out a sample of the tissue, just like you or I would with ice cream. Incredibly, as Sam stared down at this strange mark that wasn't there before, he heard a voice in his head say, "You fell and hurt yourself." As if some outside force is programming an excuse into his mind as to where that scoop mark had come from. Later in life, after his own alien encounters had long ceased, he claims his last visitation was when he was 17, and they haven't come back since. He claimed to have learned how to use the alien techniques in hypnotic mind control and subterfuge against them. Incredibly, he claims he's managed to cause disruption among the ETs themselves by tampering with the minds of their own abductee victims. One female abductee in 1991 volunteered to be his test subject for the psychological warfare he wanted to wage against the ETs. And Sims, knowing full well the aliens routinely scanned the minds of their subjects, wanted to throw a monkey wrench into their system by implanting an artificial memory that they have no way to account for. So he used the power of hypnotic suggestion to implant a completely false memory and buried it in her subconscious. Well, the woman wouldn't be able to consciously recall or access his memory herself, but the ETs would pick it up during one of their routine mind scans and have no idea where it came from. Sims claims he would also give the woman a post-hypnotic suggestion that would cause her to wake up out of the alien-induced trance as soon as this memory was accessed. According to this female abductee, the suggestion worked. She came fully awake in the middle of the ordeal and shouted at the aliens, "Daryl knows what you're doing." According to this woman, the aliens seemed so perturbed that they couldn't account for what was happening, that they seemed to be on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Sims contends that while this may seem like a minor incident, to be able to disrupt and manipulate the alien protocol even in the slightest degree was a big deal. They had never experienced interference like this before, didn't know what to make of it. Daryl Sims felt as if he had finally struck back at the entities in retaliation for all the years of stress that caused him as a young man. He'd given them some stress of their own to have to deal with. And then we're going to turn from Daryl Sims to the Reed family. Their encounters with the aliens seems to span several generations as well as several states. First encounter occurred in the late 1960s in Massachusetts, and the most recent took place in Brownsburg, Indiana in 2009. Their unexplained alien sightings are actually made a part of an official Massachusetts history in 2015 and now touted as the owned the UFO incident officially recorded as a historically significant and true event. Their strange legacy with UFOs began in 1966 when brothers Tom and Matthew were getting ready to go to sleep in their bunk beds and a luminous ball of light floated right through their window. There was a change in the atmosphere as soon as the light emerged. It seemed to be statically charged, and deep worry and fear and dread began to consume the two brothers. They sat in their bunk beds and they knew they were being watched. They were just small children of 6 and 4 years old, respectively, so they really didn't know what to make of what they were seeing. Best thing they knew to do at that point was close their eyes, pull the covers over their head, and hope the apparitions would go away. After a few moments of seeming to scan their entire room and the adjoining hallway, the orbs finally left. But their presence was just a precursor to what was going to come. It seemed in retrospect that these orbs were some sort of probes that were scouting and surveying the home. And 2 days later, that survey bore fruit. Right around 9 p.m. when the two brothers were about to go to sleep, they saw two rapid flashes of blue light as if a camera flash had gone off twice in quick succession. They looked into the hallway, and right at the top of the stairs, they saw two alien beings standing and looking back at them. Well, as we've already seen in other stories, this method of transport seems to be a common theme in accounts of alien encounters. Apparently, it's a teleportation mechanism of some type. After emerging into their home in this fashion, these entities led the Reed brothers outside and into an empty field on the outskirts of the property. They were made to walk in a straight line with Tom in front and Matthew following behind. Tom recalls constantly looking over his shoulder to keep track of his little brother's whereabouts, but once he was about 20 feet from the UFO, he couldn't see his brother any longer. Then Tom turned back to the craft to see one solitary alien standing in front of it. And he felt like he's being asked to walk towards this creature, and so he did it, as he felt an odd sensation of calmness. Once outside the ship, Tom was relieved to see his brother standing just a few feet away in a winding passageway. His brother Matthew waited there where Tom was led to another room. This room contained a giant flat screen on the wall. The screen came to life with images of space, including several galaxies. Oddly, these galaxies were shown to converge together like a shoe, and they just moved and morphed till they formed what looked unmistakably like a tennis shoe. Then the galaxies dispersed, and the image of a giant willow tree surrounded by water filled the screen. Tom Reed had no idea what the significance of these images were, but the alien seemed to insist it was somehow important. Where during this incident there was no medical examination, as was usually common in alien encounters. The main purpose seemed almost like some sort of bizarre introduction or orientation. But nobody knew an orientation for what. And shortly after a tour of the craft, the two boys were returned safely to their beds. Well, after this introductory session, the aliens seemed to have shelved their findings and taken a year off. Next encounter occurred almost exactly 1 year later in 1967. During this encounter, the boys had again just gone to bed, and their mother was checking up on them, strangely double-checking the windows as if she feared something would come in before leaving the brothers alone. Well, Tom and Matthew talked briefly before they saw a strange blue light emanating from the very window their mother had seemed so inexplicably concerned about. Light then shot through the window in a blinding flash and hit Tom right in the chest. Very next instant, Tom was gone. Matthew, incredibly alarmed by this disappearing act, jumped off the bunk bed and started screaming and crying over the unknown fate of his brother. We ran into his mother's room and told her that Tom was missing, and his mother, already woken up by the commotion, went with Matthew to look through the house for Tom. While they were in the midst of their search, they heard a loud crash, and Matthew seemed to vanish into thin air as well. Completely horrified, the mother was now frantically searching for two missing kids. Mother then woke up the grandmother, and they proceeded to search each and every square inch of the property looking for Tom and Matthew. But this search would be futile, since if their story is to be believed, both children had been teleported directly to the alien craft. Interesting to note that during the first abduction, the alien captors had come into the house and walked the boys all the way to the ship. Yet by the second encounter a year later, they could easily beam them right on board. Some alien theorists have contended in order for the ETs to teleport people to their craft, they first have to be implanted with special transponders, the classic alien implant, don't you know, which are able to act as receivers for the ET's technology on the craft, enabling the targets to be beamed right on board. The alien implant has to be in place in order for this to happen, so first encounter always involved the subjects being physically walked out to the vessel. He could only be beamed up later by way of the implant. At any rate, Tom says it was after the alien entities seemed to be having a particularly difficult time with him that they brought his brother on board in an effort to get Tom to cooperate. Tom says he couldn't focus on the task the aliens wanted him to do because he kept crying for his brother, and then boom, like magic, his brother materialized right beside him on the vessel. Tom was then brought into a separate room and examined while his brother was up standing right where he had arrived. The aliens became fixated on his cleft foot. Apparently they'd never seen one before. Tom was then led around the craft, subjected to various procedures before they were both dropped off in the back of the family property. So there they were, situated about 15 feet apart, staring at each other in the face of a quiet and fearful shock. The frantic mother found them frozen like statues in this horrific state. She ran up to them, and after a round of crying and hugging on all sides, managed to pull them back from the psychological brink that they'd been taken to. And just like any other mother would, she made sure they were warm and dry and brought them inside for refreshments. Tom drank orange juice while his brother was given a glass of soda. It was then that Tom noticed his brother idly playing with the bottle opener, and it was reacting strangely to his person. He'd put it on its edge, and he'd merely point at the metal with his index finger, and it'd flip up into the air onto its back. Tom called for his mother to come witness his feat. Upon seeing it, an extremely worried look came across her face, led the boys into the living room couch, where they promptly fell asleep. Well, the next encounter involved more than just two brothers. It involved the entire family. Tom and Matthew, their mother Natch, and their grandmother were all traveling back from a horse show when they noticed a large UFO trailing their vehicle. This event occurred on Labor Day, 1969. There were several people off from school and work in the general area who, at least in some fashion, saw the event. Tom says the pursuing object was so large it looked like a flying strip mall. The entire craft was covered in windows and red and white lighting pulsed from it. They were crossing the Sheffield Bridge, and Tom's recalled at the time he was busy in the back seat eating atomic fireballs. And his grandmother was reminding him not to give his brother any so he wouldn't choke. After this mundane childhood exchange, the car traveled over the bridge, and then they first noticed the object. Soon after, everything seemed to become ominously quiet, and they felt that strange charged feeling in the air that always seemed to serve as an early warning system that the alien abduction was going to take place. And then the car came to a stop on the side of the road as if it were programmed to do so. In a blinding flash, the whole carload of family members was then transferred up to the hovering craft. Tom recalls arriving in a room that looked like a huge hangar of some sort. He was then led by the arm by a couple of classic lay alien types to another room and made to sit on a metal table. And as strange as it sounded, here he was greeted by a different kind of being that reminded him of an ant in its shape. Had a humanoid head, but his body is very insect-like, tapering off into a teardrop torso. From his torso came appendages that looked similar to bamboo sticks. Well, two of these appendages seemed to constitute the creature's main legs and terminated in what Tom described as elephant-like feet. The other four appendages ended in what appeared to be human-like hands. Tom believes the entity he encountered was somehow manufactured almost like a genetically engineered robot, created for the sole purpose of carrying out examinations and procedures on specimens such as himself. Well, this is a theme that many abductees concur with, suggesting there are several working drone-type beings that are created to do the tedious busy work of abduction for the other aliens. And despite his business-like bedside manner, he found himself to be particularly frightened of this creature, and as soon as it took its huge black eyes off of him, he jumped off the table and ran out of the room. And most of his adventures with the aliens, he seems to have been able to move, which is in contrast with most other alien abductees' accounts about what the abductee is always rendered partially paralyzed. It's unclear if his captors viewed the child as less of a threat, and so it didn't bother immobilizing him, or if they just happened to do things a little bit differently. Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show, and we'll be back tomorrow and talk more about alien abductions. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening.